Hey everyone, Gill Gross here, and it is time for a preview of the 2024 Roland Garros men's semifinals. I'll also give some thoughts on the Zverev Minaur match. Unfortunately, only one quarterfinal played today at RG due to the Djokovic walkover that put Casper Ruud through. There is going to be a first-time RG champion by the end of the weekend. And we also get another iteration of Alcaraz Sinner, which I'm really happy about because, quite frankly, and I don't know if I have said this at any point because I'm not one to poo-poo the product or complain about this kind of thing, but there has been a real lack of blockbuster elite versus elite matchups during this clay swing, this Roland Garros lead up. It hasn't been the best. So I'm really happy that we get this Alcaraz Sinner, and Ruud Zverev is one that it's intriguing because I think nobody really knows which way that one's going to go. I'm pumped. I'm pumped for this semifinal lineup, and let's get into it. Let's start with Alcaraz Sinner. Head-to-head 4-4. Sinner has won 2 out of the last 3. Alcaraz won their only meeting this year. But I think ultimately, when you look at that head-to-head, although it is tied, although Alcaraz has won plenty of times, including a massive match at the U.S. Open in 2022, for most of their head-to-head, Alcaraz has been the better tennis player in general, and therefore Sinner's ability to play level with him, to play equal with him, has led to the suggestion, and I think it's been an accurate suggestion, that Jannik Sinner matches up quite favorably against Carlos Alcaraz. So let's start there. A lot of things have worked for Sinner in this matchup. First, a massive clutch advantage. I'll talk about the breakpoint conversion stats later on this in this analysis, but it really favors Jannik Sinner. And under pressure, he has been the better player for the most part, if you look at the totality of their matches. Enough baseline hugging and ground stroke pace to rush Alcaraz. You take away a lot of what Alcaraz is able to do, particularly on his forehand, when you're able to rush him. Superior baseline consistency. That has also worked out in Jannik Sinner's favor. I think the way I would summarize this is when Alcaraz gets into a baseline slugfest, when the points consist of running corner to corner and bashing forehands and backhands, Sinner has the edge. When it's lateral, baseline, power-to-power tennis, Sinner comes out on top, or at least he has so far. At Indian Wells, Alcaraz, after the opening set, started to make sure that that wasn't the style of tennis that was going to be played. He made a change at the start of the second set. More slicing on his backhand, more serve and volley, more drop shotting, more forehand drive variety. So just because you're hitting a topspin forehand doesn't mean that it's all the same topspin forehand. Sometimes you're going to go fast and flat. Sometimes you're going to go higher and loopier and slower. Sometimes you're going to introduce more extreme angles. Sometimes you're going to play down the middle. He was doing more things with his drive forehand and changing it up more. He got Sinner to make more errors in that third set than I've seen Sinner make in any set in the last 8 months. I haven't seen Jannik play such a sloppy set, but a lot of it was because Alcaraz was introducing these rhythm-changing balls, particularly that high spinny ball that challenged Sinner to move backwards or forwards to find his ideal contact point and generate all of his own pace, was really leading to a lot of unforced errors. And this tournament, I've kind of noticed the same thing, that a lot of Sinner's errors are coming off of either slices short in the court that make Jannik move inside the baseline and hit from a low contact point, or some of the higher balls that Sinner has to hit above his shoulders. Essentially, when the ball is in his strike zone, similar to Djokovic, you basically can never count on Jannik Sinner to miss. So Alcaraz's variety was a big deal at Indian Wells. I'd say, if I simplify the matchup dynamics, I'd say this. Either Alcaraz wins because his weaponry is more vast, because his skill set, his assets or his attributes are just a little bit more than Jannik's, or Sinner wins because he has a more reliable, programmed game that he can execute on the biggest points with 95% accuracy and consistency. What about clay? Let's move on to the clay factor. There's an argument that it helps Alcaraz. It goes something like this. One Sinner's ball will be less rushing. And I just think Alcaraz's forehand, it's a different beast when it has a second to breathe. And the clay gives it that second. So does Indian Wells, mind you. And the second argument would be Sinner's serve advantage won't matter as much. Jannik's serve just keeps getting better and better and better. And it's been, look, there have been so many improvements that he's made in the last year or so, but that's one of them. And Alcaraz's serve, as I discussed pre-tournament with Tom Corey, who showed us the analytics, Alcaraz's serve has not really improved all that much in the last year, and it lags behind Sinner's, but on clay that matters less. I think there's also an argument that clay helps Sinner in certain areas. When you're playing more longer rallies, Sinner's high percentage game is more likely to accumulate into a consistency advantage. And secondly, it's harder for Alcaraz to net rush with high frequency in the slower conditions. I think Alcaraz coming forward early and often is a good way to play Sinner. Generally speaking, it's something that he can do in the matchup, but he's going to be pinned on the baseline a little bit more often due to the clay factor. It's going to be harder for him to play closer up to the baseline. It's going to be harder for him to hit a damaging approach shot, et cetera, et cetera. One big key for Sinner that I just want to throw in there before I kind of talk about the physicality and the mental, I do think it's going to be important that Sinner does try to stay up on the baseline, to not let that high spinny ball push him back. I think he needs to take it on much better than he did at Indian Wells. And offensively, because the court is slower, taking time away is going to be that much more important for Jannik. I also think that at times, if there has been one fault on the Alcaraz forehand, which to me has been pleasantly consistent, other than, I'm just going to leave it at that. The Alcaraz forehand has been satisfyingly consistent, and that's been a big positive for him. But the depth has been sometimes lacking, and for Sinner to take advantage of that, I think that requires a good amount of baseline hugging where he's going to be ready to get on top of that shorter ball. Because even when Alcaraz drops the ball short, it's usually spinning quite a bit. So it's going to get that jump off the court. If you're not taking it early, you're not getting any benefit. You're not able to take advantage of the lack of depth. Okay, what to make of the physicality factor? I think Alcaraz is probably closer to his normal fitness levels. Both of them came in with some injury concerns. For Alcaraz, it was a hitting injury. It was the arm. And for Sinner, it was a movement injury. It was the hip. My concern with Alcaraz was always about the performance of his forehand. It was never about his movement, never about his physicality. For Sinner, you can't really say the same. Not only do you have the hip thing, you had Jannik explaining that he was ill for 2 to 3 weeks, and he was literally in bed, didn't touch a racket for 2 weeks, I think a little more than 2 weeks. He had exactly 9 days to prepare for Roland Garros. And that basically means that there is no chance, no way, that Sinner's fitness levels are at 100%. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not good enough to win Roland Garros, particularly if he's able to win with enough dominance and enough efficiency to not get into a physical war. But if it does come to that, do I really have all that much confidence that Jannik's legs are going to hold up? No, not exactly. Now, I do want to follow up on something that I've talked about in my coverage, which is that Sinner had a physical wobble in the Gasquet match, and that was pretty concerning to see at the end of a third set. So I have more information on that because Jim Courier spoke with Darren Cahill. And again, this is all from Jim. But Cahill said that Jannik was expecting to go out onto court much earlier than he ended up going out. And I'm not sure what the circumstances were with the schedule, but essentially he badly misjudged his eating schedule. And he did not have enough to eat. And that was the explanation for why he really had a big energy dip at the end of the Gasquet straight set win. So that's the explanation, and I just wanted to follow up on that. I do think if it goes 5, advantage Alcaraz. Now let's go to the mental. We've talked about some of the tactics. We've talked about the physical. Let's talk about the mental, especially because we expect a close match. And this is an area where I like Sinner. First, there's the confidence factor. You can't teach confidence. It only really comes from positive results. Short term, long term, doesn't matter. Confidence is really not something you can force. And for Sinner, he has that forgot how to lose confidence level right now. In fact, he might be, no guarantee, he might be too confident right now to get tight. 54-4 since Beijing last year. He has won 5 out of the last 9 tournaments that he's played and finished. So taking out the times that he's pulled out without playing a match. So 5 out of the last 9. Alcaraz has won 1 title in his last 13 tournaments. And a lot of that has come down to the head. Focus issues, nerve management issues, cloudy decision-making. It's been a big part of that. And Alcaraz is the first to say that. In this head-to-head, Sinner has performed much better with scoreboard pressure than Alcaraz. In fact, when Sinner has been getting when there was a point where Sinner was getting the better of the head-to-head, especially before the Indian Wells turnaround, I think there was actually a mischaracterization of how much Sinner was dominating the matches. He actually wasn't. He kept winning close matches, and he was continuously much more efficient on his opportunities than Alcaraz. The only match that it was kind of even was the U.S. Open, where neither player could really convert on a break point opportunity. But here's what it is for the entire head-to-head so far. Sinner has saved 74% of his break points, 62 for 84. He has faced more break points in the head-to-head than Alcaraz. But Alcaraz has saved 52% of his break points against, 35 of 67. That's enormous. I mean, the difference between 74% points won and 52% points won in a sample size that at the moment is, approaching 200 points. It's not a tiny sample size. That's huge. And ultimately, I think Sinner's game is more quiet. His intentions are more clear. In general, it's just a higher percentage style. I think that helps him under pressure. Meanwhile, dealing with expectation continues to be a process for Alcaraz that I don't think is fully gone through. Like, I don't think Alcaraz is a finished product when it comes to being a great big match player. Now, if you look at the slams that he's won, because he's done this twice before, which is the obvious counterpoint to what I just said. Well, US Open 2022, he's a 19-year-old fresh on the scene, not even really seen as a favorite to win the tournament until Medvedev and Kyrgios go out. And then it's kind of, okay, now he had to deal with the expectations playing Tiafoe in the semis and Ruud in the final, which he did really, really well. But I do think there's that era of blissful naivety as a young player, especially when you're a teenager, where it's like, I'm just having fun here. I don't even know where I am. I don't know what's happening. And you just kind of go out and you play without a lot of pressure. It kind of builds after that. Like, that's how I see it. We know what happened at Roland Garros last year, but Wimbledon 2023, he's not supposed to be ready to win on grass. Like, the expectations weren't there for him. He was not supposed to beat Djokovic. Novak beat him on clay, so the thought was Novak is definitely going to beat him on grass. And he played really free, really loose. He even closed out the match brilliantly. Like, that 5th set was a masterpiece. But then, in the slams since then, or the 3 slams that he's played most recently with what I feel is a heavier weight of expectation on his shoulder, it's been harder for him. The RG loss against Djokovic, where expectation crushed him. The US Open loss against Medvedev, where he didn't play all that badly. The Australian Open loss to Zverev, where I do think he didn't play a very good. Zverev also played very well. Don't get me wrong. But, I'm looking at his resume, his slam resume, and I'm trying to find patterns mentally of when he performs at his best, when he hasn't. And I just think there's something there. The vibe of this match reminds me most of Roland Garros last year, because there's an immense amount of hype for this matchup. at the end of a major. Immense. And Alcaraz is a slight favorite. So I know Carlitos will play with a ton of energy, but will he overdo it? Will he play overexcited? These are question marks to me, not question marks I have about Sinner. Sinner, I think, will be very calm, collected, and play his game. I just haven't seen any mental cracks in Jannik Sinner whatsoever recently. So I'm picking Sinner in 4. I like the consistency edge that he has in long rallies. I don't think his serve advantage is going to fully be negated on the clay. Even though it's going to help negate it, I don't think it's going to fully negate it. And I think it might be a key under pressure. Let's see how it plays out, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're looking at some service winners, some aces for Sinner when he really needs them. And I really like his clutch and his confidence factor. I like the mental side for Jannik. Normally in a matchup that is so difficult to predict, I would say 5. But as I said, I'm going to break my rule here, and I'm going to go 4 just because I do think 5 would favor Alcaraz. Okay, Ruud versus Zverev, but first I want to talk about Zverev versus Minaur. It was a 3-set win for Sasha, 3 close sets, very close. In fact, total points won, it was an 8-point difference. And rarely do you see a straight set win only have an 8-point difference in total points. This match took a lot of heat on social media. The combined stats were 48 winners to 101 unforced errors. So anybody looking at that stat sheet was like, wow, this is an atrocity of a quarterfinal. I disagree. I don't think it was a bad match. I don't think they played badly. Let me give you a microcosm example of how those stats can mislead, and then I'll zoom out. So let's say you play a 25-shot rally. No pushing, lots of great movement, defense, depth, changes of direction, injections of pace, absorption of pace, the whole 9. Well-played rally, 25 shots. And then someone nets a backhand down the line. Unforced error. Stats don't know it was a good point. Stats have no clue it was a good point. Stats just say, unforced error. This match was that 100 times. And it's not surprising that it played out that way. You have nighttime clay conditions, which, by the way, I'm ready to say goodbye to. I'm an appreciator of all surface speeds, slow and fast, but I do think that nighttime at Roland Garros, it does push the extreme level of slow that can sometimes make the matches less enjoyable, in my opinion. But anyway, night clay conditions plus S-tier defense, both of them, and B-tier attackers, both of them, especially if you take away Zverev's serve. Good attackers, not great. Defense, great. Slow-ass conditions. I mean, come on. This is what we're going to get. We're going to get not a lot of winners. So, surprise, surprise, there were not a lot of winners. There were a lot of unforced errors. But I think what Zverev did here was actually really impressive. His serve gave him marginal purpose in this match. I looked at the unreturned stats. Zverev had a slight edge, much slimmer than you would think it would be in a Zverev versus Minaur match. What he did do was he beat Minaur in these long baseline rallies, and the way he did that was by being the more consistent player. Unforced errors in rallies 9 shots or more. Zverev 16, Minaur 26. That's a 10-point difference in a match that was ultimately decided by 8 points. Zverev's movement and the conditions were just really neutralizing Minaur's power, and it seemed like he was trying to reach back for an extra 10% on his forehand, and that hurt his consistency to the point where if you're looking at one shot that really failed Alex de Minaur, it was absolutely the forehand side that faltered much too much for his liking. But I do think that there was a reason for it. He was overhitting it. He was overhitting it because of the circumstances of the match. And Zverev, being a harder hitter, had an easier time forcing errors while still playing within himself. And he was a little bit more patient, which is surprising. And it's amazing that a 6'6" guy can be more patient than the little fitness monster that is Alex de Minaur. That said, it wasn't perfect from Zverev. Very hot and cold on the forehand again. I thought in the first set the forehand was awesome. Thought in the second set the forehand was really bad. And then there were also issues closing out the match on his serve. The 5-3 service game started with a really un-Zverev-like backhand unforced error and a double fault, love 30 hole. He ended up getting broken. And then he broke back to win the match. But still, he did not. The nerves looked like it got the best of him serving it out. It's not what you want to see. Okay, so as for the Ruud semifinal, this is a rematch of last year's semifinal. I picked Ruud in that one. I did so because I liked his second serve and his forehand under pressure more. I felt Zverev was having a lot of ups and downs in his matches, and I also thought that Ruud might have a physical edge, which I don't know if, Zverev was probably not fully there physically at that point. But neither of them were there. Like, here's what's so interesting about this rematch. Both of them are on paper just way better now. Neither of them faced a top 10 player en route to, did Ruud beat Rune? Was Rune in the top 10 at that time? Anyway, Rune was in the top 10 at that time, but Rune played an awful match. Zverev did not play a top 10 player. But remember also in the context of their seasons, Ruud hadn't done much all year except for Geneva and Rome. He was having an awful year before then. Zverev hadn't done much all year with the lower seeding because of the injury. They're in much better shape now. I just wanted to point that out. It ended up being a pretty awful match last year. Zverev was banged up. He couldn't really move very well. And it was a listless performance from Sasha and a pretty easy win for Ruud. For this preview, I want to do it more like I usually do. I'll talk about Zverev's advantages. I'll talk about Ruud's advantages, and then I'll make a pick. Let's start with Sasha. Ruud is a my forehand to your backhand player. He loves that pattern. He wants to get into that pattern. He wants to start hitting heavy inside-out forehands into your righty backhand. And once you're in that blender, you really can't get out of that blender unless you are exceptional on the backhand. Zverev is exceptional on the backhand, especially because the heavy topspin that Ruud bothers people with on that inside-out forehand, it's not going to bother 6'6" Zverev as much. And the bigger you hit the ball into Zverev's backhand, the worse it is. Like it is a wall of brutality, that backhand side. So you really can't make progress there. It's not that he's going to hit a bunch of winners if you hit it to his backhand. The problem is you are not going to find anything to attack. You're not going to get errors, and you're not going to get anything attackable. So by going to Zverev's backhand, you're stuck. It doesn't do anything for you. You got to try to play through his forehand. That's not really as natural for Ruud, generally. Zverev has also done a really good job this year of hitting his forehand down the line to set up a backhand pattern, which is going to be the pattern that he wants to get into against Casper. Mind you, Zverev used to be terrible at this. Zverev's forehand used to be very predictable. He loved to take it cross court. He hated to hit it inside out. He hated to hit it down the line. And now, is he awesome going that direction when he's attacking? No. But when he's trading, he's actually pretty good at mixing it in and setting the pattern. Zverev's serve pace is also a factor. He's going to make north of 70% of his first serves at north of 125 miles per hour on average, as he always does. Well, what does this do to Ruud? Casper usually blocks his returns against big serves. Now, I'll have my eyes peeled. I wonder if he changes that up. I wonder if he's able to hit out on his returns against Zverev on this occasion. But blocking the returns, it's not a great formula for neutralization if Zverev is hitting the +1 confidently. Now, Ruud, in a lot of different matchups, can get away with that because he makes a lot. He's able to scramble to win some of the points, and then he's able to do much better on second return points where he takes a big cut at the ball. He's a good second serve returner. But you got to just remember against Zverev, you can't rely on him missing first serves to break. You're going to need to crack his first serve because he's going to make all his first serves. And I just don't know if blocking all the returns is long-term going to be enough for Casper. I also want to say that I think it's key that Zverev finished Demon in straights. I was concerned about the physical side for Zverev, obviously after back-to-back 5-setters. But now I'm no longer really concerned. I thought that de Minaur might push him to 4, might push him past the 4-hour mark again. And in that case, I would have thought, okay, I mean, how many more times can Zverev actually do this? He has great endurance, but let's be real. But I feel like the de Minaur match probably put him back on track. Ruud advantages. The big one is this. If Zverev expects to win, being passive from the baseline, he is going to be met with a reality check. And that reality check is going to be Ruud's forehand, which is going to be the biggest, baddest, most aggressive, heaviest ground stroke in these baseline rallies. And if Zverev expects to just, massage the ball around, probe, play pitter-patter, right? Ruud's forehand, it's going to break open these points. It's going to tilt the scales in favor of Casper. So Zverev, his defense is going to be valuable, don't get me wrong, but if he does not bring offense to the table on a frequent basis, it's just not going to be enough because Ruud's forehand should be the X factor in a match like that. Like if you copy-paste the way Zverev was playing against de Minaur and you make it against Ruud, it's a totally different story because Ruud's forehand has the muscle to hit through where de Minaur couldn't do it with his ground strokes. He wasn't strong enough. Okay. If Zverev isn't coming forward, I also think Ruud is a fast enough player to turn a lot of points around. We saw how de Minaur neutralized Zverev's ground stroke aggression. Casper can do a lot of that. And then the difference is he can bring a lot more power thereafter. So I think Zverev's net rushing is key, but if he stays back, I expect Ruud's defense, more specifically his movement, to really have a say in this. And lastly, Ruud has really improved his backhand down the line this year, and that is going to be crucial for getting points back onto Zverev's forehand and off of his backhand. So I talked about for Ruud how the inside-out forehand pattern is probably not really going to work as well. Well, what needs to work well in substitution of that is the backhand down the line and potentially the forehand inside in. He needs to hit Zverev's forehand to get that exchange forehand and forehand. And notice I've said that about both players now. So Zverev is looking to change direction to get into the backhand of backhand. Ruud is looking to change direction to get into the forehand of forehand. Zverev needs to do it on his forehand, the change, and Ruud needs to do the redirecting on his backhand, which is probably slightly easier for Zverev, all things considered. But we'll see how it plays out. My pick, and I will admit in this one, it's really hard for me to read, kind of struggling with it, and I kind of have a little bit of a bias towards what I picked pre-tournament. Zverev is the lower floor, higher ceiling player. I think he'll know he can't get away with the passive play against Ruud, and he'll raise his game. If he plays like he did against Nadal, I don't know if Casper is dynamic enough to get to that level. Now, if he plays like he did against Griekspoor, I fully expect Ruud to beat him, right? So it kind of comes down to that. And, for all the deep runs that Ruud has had at slams, including back-to-back Roland Garros finals, his only top 10 win at a major is against Holger Rune, who completely no-showed in that match. So I just don't know if he's dynamic enough to beat Zverev if Zverev is actually coming forward and hitting his forehand clean and bringing an offensive threat to go along with his serve, to go along with the shield that is his backhand and his consistency and his defensive capabilities. I'll add that Casper has used the forehand drop shot really well in this tournament just because I forgot to say it. And I think that might be important when Ruud is actually attacking Zverev to mix that in. But I think that is where I'm going to leave it. Ruud, also, by the way, hasn't played on Chatrier since the first round. Has played in the morning a lot. I do feel, I'm excited to watch him because, full disclosure, I feel like I've missed a lot of Casper Ruud because of him playing a lot in the mornings in the first week. And then playing Fritz during the Djokovic-Musetti match, and my attention was on Djokovic-Musetti. I'm really curious to see what happens here. Huge match for both Casper and Sasha. All right, I will leave it now officially at that. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.